is the fun endurance black over on the treadmill, so it was really a burner all throughout. So you kind of got done, you were like, I don't know what happened, I'm tired, I can't feel my arms.
All right, Patrick, turn it over there.
Good with it?
I think so.
All right, team. So welcome. My name is Patrick. I'm the general manager of these couple Orangetheory fitnesses, Apple Valley, Eden Prairie, Chanhassen, and Shakopee, as well as I'm a fitness coach, actually on the schedule here at Chan, and been able to sub around at the different studios and be able to coach a lot of you, so that's been a really exciting newer part of my career. But I'm also a registered dietitian, so that's what I went to school for at St. John's University, then got my graduate certificate and became a registered dietitian through Iowa State. And so we're going to be talking about a couple topics today. We're going to be talking about kind of the macronutrients, just a breakdown of what are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, what are the benefits of them, because anytime that we start trying to take control of something in our life or try and, I kind of compare it to house renovation. It's like, I need a new doohickey, right? And you go to the store and you're like, I need a new one, but you don't really know what that thing is called, right? So we're going to start really general so you know at least how to talk about it and what to focus on. So then when you go forward in life and you try and play around with things, you know at least how to ask the right questions and what to look into depending on how you're feeling day in and day out based on the activity you're doing. Then we'll go over some general nutrition guidelines because sometimes nutrition gets oddly specific when it doesn't need to be. Sometimes we can take a step back, look at the big picture of things and really have a really common sense approach to nutrition, and then fine tune things after we already make some of those common sense kind of changes in our diet. Then we'll go into that mindful eating, little fun activity and some basics on that. And then we'll get really specific as far as for if you're already kind of tracking on the daily or tracking at least part of your diet, getting even more specific based on your goals. Last but not least, we'll also go into a little bit of hydration because if your body is not hydrated, you will not feel good, right? And therefore, you won't perform good and it will inhibit your results. So first thing first, we're going to be talking about the macronutrients, so carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So carbohydrates, as far as for carbohydrates, they are the main source of fuel for the body. The brain, the human brain specifically, can run on two things, carbohydrates and ketones, right? So everyone's heard of the ketogenic diet. And so when your body does not have carbohydrates as a source of fuel, it needs to make ketones in order for your brain to continue to function, right? And then that's what it goes to. But carbohydrates are the main source of fuel for the body. Carbohydrate requirements do vary depending on the type of daily activity or the type of exercise you're doing. So for example, endurance athletes are very carbohydrate heavy, versus maybe if they're more short bursts of intense energy, you maybe need less because the body is more going to use the ATP, creatine, things like that as far as for that initial 2 to 15 seconds of an energy burst, right? Then some good sources include whole grain breads, brown rice, quinoa, oats, pasta, sweet potatoes. One thing to note is at least half your grains should be whole grains. So we like whole grains because they're going to have higher vitamin and minerals as well as a higher fiber content. Okay, which we'll get into in just a second here. Just looking at some common carbohydrates that are in the typical American diet and probably some things that you typically see on your plate at home. So mashed potatoes, rice, also with kind of the calorie profiles of just knowing like, okay, when you put a cup of mashed potatoes, what does that actually equate to as far as energy-wise? About 214 calories for a cup of mashed potatoes. For the same thing for a cup of rice, right around 206 calories. So pretty similar when we're just talking about the amount of energy that we can get from these foods. Where we see a little bit more variance is when we compare some vegetables, some more mixed berries. So vegetables, for a cup of mixed vegetables, about 45 calories, right? And then for mixed berries, 80 calories. What's also nice about the mixed berries is that that's also going to come with kind of an increased amount of fiber from the actual skin, the seeds, all of that turns in or is fibrous. And why we like fiber is as far as its roughage bulk, it helps regulate the bowel movements. It helps with overall gut health, which is at the core of our immune system as well. Okay, so overall healthy gut does equate to a healthy person. Okay, helps lower cholesterol, helps control blood sugar, and then also aids in achieving a healthy overall weight. It also improves satiety, so you feel full longer, right? It's the same thing on, if you can fill up that stomach with space and with stuff, you will feel more satisfied versus more of a liquid-based diet, right? Because that's going to go through the system a little bit faster. And so fiber does help with all the things. There are two types of fiber. We have soluble and then insoluble. So soluble is, it forms like a gel-like kind of substance, and it kind of binds up other things and then helps kind of the body through that bowel movement, okay? And then insoluble does not turn to gel, it just stays its same kind of fibrous, kind of think about like sticks, twigs, things like that. It kind of keeps that form and just goes all the way through, okay? Next, we have protein. So protein is crucial in building and repairing muscles, as we all know. It also makes up DNA, hormones. It's really a basis for a lot of things, just past being the building blocks for our muscles. Okay, good sources include lean meats, poultry, eggs, dairy products, milk, cheese, fish, peanut butter. As far as for meat and other protein, a suggested serving of meat and poultry typically is around the 3 to 4 ounces. Okay, and so if you think about that, that's typically about the size of a deck of cards, or you can also use the palm of your hand. Is typically that would be like 1 serving of meat. Okay. So a lot of times when we're actually talking about serving and portion, which we'll get into in just a second here, it's a little bit variant. And then looking at the actual calorie difference between when you're talking about how lean the protein source is, or the type of chicken. So 3 ounces of just a baked chicken breast without skin is simply 105 calories. Okay? But then all of a sudden we do 3 ounces of fried chicken with skin, then all of a sudden it turns to 300 calories. Okay? So those two choices would have a similar protein content, but because of how it's cooked and how it's layered with then including the skin with the fat source, it can drastically increase the amount of calories you're taking, even though on the plate it would look almost the exact same as far as taking up the room on the plate. What we've seen at the steakhouse, right, when we got to eat, oh yeah, I'll take that 12-ounce sirloin, right? So this is a 10-ounce sirloin. And so it's great protein source, right? 55 grams of protein. That's probably most of about half of our protein intake that we would need in a typical day, all in right there on one plate. And then also what comes with that, because of the amount of fat in red meat, is right around that 390 calories total. So a little bit higher in that overall calories, but still a great overall protein source. Versus 6 ounces of grilled chicken, once again, still has a very high protein source, so 36 grams, but then is all the way down to about 165 calories total. So once again, when we're looking at that overall plate, looking at that protein option, it does make a difference. Even though it's kind of occupying that same amount of space on that plate, it does make an impact based on how much protein, what is a more of a lean protein, or does it carry some additional calories on that as well. Last of the micronutrients. Fat. So fat is a crucial source for energy for long-lasting, moderate intensity activity. Good sources of fat include fish, avocados, milk, trimmed meats, and nuts. Fun little fact about fat too, every single cell in the human body has like a lipid membrane, like a lipid layer, okay? And so by lipid, fat. So if our diets are constantly really high, and the American diet is typically high in omega-6 and omega-9 fatty acids, but the one that it's not in is the omega-3 fatty acids. We can change that lipid layer based on what we eat. If it's more based on that omega-3 fatty acid, that's going to help us have a diminished inflammation response. So our bodies are going to be able to handle and recover from stressful situation, stressful bouts of activity, and recover a little bit faster. And so that's why a lot of people do choose to supplement with fish oil or help increase kind of like the healthy fats in their diet, because we can change what we are by what we eat. Okay, so by altering that kind of lipid membrane on our cells, that can help us recover from stressful events and activities a little bit easier. This is just a nice little showing of how to estimate, because a lot of times when people are trying to eat healthier, a lot of times they're like, oh, instead of having the pretzels, the chips, the whatever at the office in the bowl, they switch to, oh, I'm having nuts. And so this is an easy way to kind of estimate what 100 calories of nuts are. And typically it's just filling up the palm of your hand. So these are some nice tools. Same thing with the meat. A serving of meat is typically about the size of the palm of your hand. But it'd be the same thing with nuts. If it fills up the palm of your hand, that's typically right around 100 calories depending on the nut. Okay. So now still staying pretty general. Has everyone heard of my plate or seen this visual before? Okay, so this changed from the My Pyramid back in the day with like the grains along the bottom kind of stacking up to more so they said, who eats out of a triangle, right? Does anyone have triangle plates at home? If so, you probably have a very modern house. Invite me over, I'd love to see it. But for most of us, we have the circular plate. So they said, okay, this makes sense, right? When you are looking at your plate of food, everyone close your eyes and think about your last meal that you had sitting down at your dinner table. Think about what that plate looked like, okay? Was half the plate fruits and vegetables? Was a quarter of the plate kind of either starchy vegetables or grains? And then was the last quarter that protein source? Typically the answer is no, right? And that's okay. But that is one of the first steps I'll say is if you had to take one thing away from today's lesson, I would say, is half your plate fruits and vegetables? It's such an easy thing, but yet we say like, that's not the answer. I want more. I want something more specific. But literally, if you went into every meal saying, I want half my plate vegetables specifically, your health and wellness would already be typically where you want it to. But that's also hard to do. Okay, so I'm not trying to dumb it down. I'm not trying to say, hey, it's super easy. But if you do make that change 1 or even 2 days a week, it will make a big difference. Here's what it can look like just with like the actual foods. So just like actually showing you, it can be an array of different colors. Eat the rainbow is another thing that sometimes we say, no, not Skittles. We're actually talking about foods here, right? And so eating the rainbow, getting a variety of colors and flavors, because typically the color of the vegetables or fruits does kind of show off what sort of vitamins and minerals they do have. And then as far as just making sure that you do also get a variety of protein sources, right? Because different proteins have different amino acid profiles. So depending on what proteins you are taking in, each different type of protein will give you a different kind of individual benefit because of the different amino acid blend. All right, so now moving on to portion versus serving size, okay? So now we're starting to get a little bit more specific and then talk about some general inconsistencies in this understanding. So as far as for the serving size, the serving size is the recommended amount to eat of a particular food versus the portion is how much you're actually served, okay? So we've all been there where we're starving, we're ravenous, we're like, where is going to get me the most food for my buck, right? AKA dollar menu, right? Chipotle, ooh, 2 scoops, right? Double it up. So that being said, we have to be careful about more isn't always better, right? And so now when we can then say, no, I don't necessarily need more. I want better quality, right, for my money. If I'm paying $10, I want the best meal for that $10 that I can get. I don't necessarily need as much food as possible for that $10. So portion sizes over the last 20 to 30 years have dramatically increased. You can see even the size of forks between 1985 all the way to 2005 has drastically increased, and then even the plate size, right? So this whole kind of thing of, well, these plates are now huge, right? We've even had to now manufacture new cupboards and cabinetry in our kitchens in a modern American home to actually fit these new 14-inch plates, right? And so it's dramatically increased over the years. Why? Do we need to eat more? Not necessarily, right? But we think we do because you have a blank canvas and you need to fill that canvas, right, for dinner. So that being said, just be cognizant of how much you're served typically does have direct implication on how much you're actually going to eat. Okay, so this is just a image of a standard burger, fries on the side, a serving of ketchup, or excuse me, a portion of ketchup, right? On the right-hand side is what actually one serving would be of those same food groups, right? So what I would typically suggest is trying to understand what a serving actually looks like, because then I'm not asking anyone to go home and start weighing everything out next time you eat. But if you weigh it out one time and get that visual of what that looks like, then all of a sudden next time you can just visually get pretty close, right? To be able to say, okay, this is typically what a serving should look like. So it can help kind of guide you in the right direction without having to get too tracker, right? If you do downsize the portion size, the bigger the portion, the more you tend to eat. So this is when I really like bringing up this study about tomato soup. Okay, so they had bowls of tomato soup, and people were asked to continue eating until they were satisfied. Okay, and so they were eating the soup, but what they didn't know is there was a tube going underneath the table into that bowl that constantly refilled that bowl of soup. Okay, so the first time around when they're eating the soup, they were eating, and kept refilling. And so they ended up eating about 4 times as much until they said, yeah, I'm satisfied, right? I can walk away now. I'm satisfied. I'm content. I can leave now. they had 4 bowls total of soup, versus when they had 1 soup bowl that didn't refill itself. Once they finished that soup bowl, they said, you know what, I'm content, and gave themselves the exact same satisfaction score, even though they had 1/4 of the amount of food, right? So think about how you can translate that to maybe something in your day-to-day life, right? If you grab the bag of chips, bring it over to the couch, you're eating the bag of chips, that's 1 portion, right? Versus if you took that bag of chips, took the handful out, put it in the bowl, grabbed the bowl, now all of a sudden that's your portion. Does that make sense? So there is something to be said about the mental satisfaction of finishing something. Hence why, even though sometimes those little 100-calorie bags or the snack pack things, it does cost a little bit more. So if you are able to portion them out beforehand for yourself, that's a strong recommendation. Or spend that little bit extra to then get those pre-portioned out snack packs, because then that gives you that mental satisfaction of, I finished this. Okay? All right, still leading and kind of talking about the portion size. So we have 2 meals here. On the left-hand side, we have an omelet taking about half the plate. We have some mushrooms, some tomatoes, and a piece of rye bread. On the right-hand side, we have the same mushrooms, the same tomatoes, the rye bread, but now we have a muffin and a Danish with that same omelet. Which one is going to leave you fuller longer?
Left side.
Left side. Does anyone think right side? It's more calories, right? More energy. Carbs, right? Where is the energy coming from? All right, team. So overall, on the left-hand side, we have 520 calories, 34 grams of protein, and 25 grams of carbohydrates. So then with that muffin and Danish, that added on the additional about 70 grams of carbohydrates. Okay? 1,000 calories, right? We've all had a 1,000-calorie meal before, right? We've all seen this before and said, like, ooh, I've definitely eaten that on a Saturday or something, you know. But this is what happens, and this is why it won't necessarily leave you fuller longer, okay? Insulin, right? So basically, once you eat, your body has to break down that food, gets it out into the bloodstream. Your bloodstream goes, oh, we have all these nutrients in the blood. We need to get it somewhere, right? And so then the pancreas pumps out insulin. Insulin then goes out and tells the cells, hey, there's a lot of sugar in the blood. Take it in. And that's when your muscles take it in. Sometimes it gets converted to fat, stuff like that. So then all of a sudden it stores it. And when you ramp up and have a really sharp spike in that sugar, that's when the insulin, the pancreas goes, whoa, 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 we are way behind, right? It ups that amount of insulin release and ups that response. Therefore, you get this crash, right? And so after one of those carbohydrate heavier meals, we've all been there where it's like, ooh, I need a nap. Like, I'm done, I'm cashed out, right? So that being said, what ends up happening after that crash is that's when we feel fatigue, that's when we can feel a little bit nauseous, that's when we can also feel hungry again. So then when you are at that buffet and you did grab that muffin, that Danish, maybe that donut, right, whatever else, that's why all of a sudden it leads into, well, I'll grab another one on the way out, right? I'm already kind of hungry again. And it's because we had this rapid response of insulin that pumped out to lower our blood sugar back to normal, but then all of a sudden it crashes to then get into that little dip. And that's when then we go back and have a little more because we're hungry again, because our body's telling us, whoops, sorry, we overkilled it. Like we overdid it.
So even with that dip, that can cause the nausea as well?
Yeah. Yep. And so a lot of times too with, not to get into too much detail, but sometimes with exercise, right, what happens when we start exercising? Our body uses any sugar that's in that bloodstream for energy. And so sometimes if you have too much of a carbohydrate-rich snack, like too close to working out, you'll have a double dip, one from the actual sugar crash, and then one actually from the exercise. And so that's why sometimes if you ever tried drinking a sugary drink right before working out, like 15 minutes prior to, sometimes that can actually, even though it should be able to be used for energy, it can actually lead to a double dip and basically a double drop here. Because then let's say this happened at the bottom here, and then exercise hits, and the body goes, we don't have any sugar in the body, right? And then that's when you start feeling really nauseous and you start seeing the spots and you're like, ooh, working out is not gonna happen today, right? So, all right, so overall tips for a great plate. And once again, this is still kind of general, right? So now we can all close our eyes, visualize what a plate should look like. But balance calories, enjoy your food, but eat less, right? Control the portions, control how much gets put on that plate first time around. Avoid oversized portions. Cut back on foods high in solid fats, added sugars and salts. Make half your plate fruits and vegetables, and then drink water for thirst on the side of meals. Okay? All right, so now we're going to go into kind of one approach with kind of the still kind of common sense approach to reaching out for your diet. Mindful eating. Has anyone heard of this topic, mindful eating? Yeah? Awesome. Okay. Mindful eating overall. What we're going to be doing is we have a desire to feel good and feel healthy. That's going to lead us to mindfully eat and stay conscious of what we're doing. Okay? And then what that's automatically going to lead to is basically when you're hungry, you're going to eat. When you feel satisfied, you're not going to eat, right? And then that's going to lead to that healthy relationship with food where it doesn't feel like a battle. You don't get mad at yourself for like, oh, why did I eat that piece of cake? It's like you ate it because you were hungry and you're enjoying the social experience. But then what we stay conscious and mindful of is, did you have a quarter of the sheet of cake, or did you have, a thin slice to get a taste for it? You enjoyed the experience. You enjoyed that time with your family, friends, celebrating your kids' third birthday, right? We've all been there. So the old thing about food is not to restrict yourself from those experiences and from all the great things that food does give us, but it's also to respect how it can also kind of double back on us. And it's a double-edged sword, right? None of us can live without food, and we can live with it, and it can really enrich us. So I have a couple helpers here that are going to hand out a little plate with a delicious snack, and I just want everyone to wait to eat it. And as they're handing out, I'm going to keep going. At home, if you're listening in, I want you to head to your cabinet, grab a chip, grab a cracker, something simple, and just grab one and bring it out to wherever you're watching this presentation from. That's why when you guys asked us, is there going to be food here? I was like, no, you should definitely eat before this because this is all I got. So for the people at home, I just have a saltine on a plate as my example, but you can be a potato chip, you can bring a wheat thin, whatever sort of like simple cracker you have at home in your cabinet. Go ahead and grab that Triscuit, nut thin, whatever that is. So 5 tips for mindful eating, okay? We want to shift away from autopilot eating. So that means like, every single day, no matter how I'm feeling, I just eat this food. Right? While I'm driving to work, that's why I enjoy my first bar, right? It's like when you are not consciously focused on eating and taking in calories, there are going to be times in life that you have to, right? But generally speaking, we want to try and limit those experiences. We want to take mindful bites, so we want to stay conscious of what we're actually tasting, how we're enjoying the experience, what we like about this food, what we don't, rather than just shoveling it in, right? We want to mindfully check in with ourselves and our hunger cues. So in a second here, we'll go over a little hunger scale, right? And listening, am I still hungry? Am I full? Am I still enjoying this food that I'm eating? Or am I just eating it because we're all part of the clean plate club, right? And then last but not least, think positive. So not necessarily punishing ourselves for enjoying the foods and enjoying the experience that the food gave us and provided to us. So we're going to practice 2 of these things and talk through them. The first one we're going to practice is this mindful tasting. Okay, so at home and here, this is what, if you did not get a clipboard with a pen, you can just use your phone to take notes. If you've ever done like a wine tasting before, we're going to basically be doing that with the saltine. Okay, so we're going to talk about the acidity and whether it tastes dusty or no. So what you're going to do is, and this is going to be the longest experience you've ever had to eat a saltine that typically you crumble up, throw right into that bowl of soup, right? And typically the saltine is the sideshow, right? It's just like something to throw on top for a little bit of substance. Today, this is the star of the meal, right? This is the star of the plate. So we are going to start off with the sight. So I'm going to give everyone basically a minute to write down everything that they see in this saltine cracker.
What if I already ate my cracker? Wow.
You might have to grab another one. Does anyone need another one? I do have plenty.
You have to stay after class.
And at home, I know this is going to be challenging, but try and stick with us at home if you do have that cracker, if you do have a little chip. Right now, we're writing down the sights. So we're writing down our observations. So for some examples with the saltine, or maybe you're noticing, I can notice the little toastedness of it. I can see the grain of salt on it, and I know how that's going to taste. The texture, is it crispy? All right, so now what you can do is you can go and pick up the cracker and you can use your sense of smell. How does it smell? Can you smell anything? Does it smell toasted? Can you smell the salt? Can you absolutely smell nothing?
Good. You can't smell anything.
COVID. And really try and find something. So try and really dive in, get a couple whiffs, see what it smells like. Taste is like 85, 90% smell, so you should be able to start picking up some sort of flavors, what it might be tasting like. All right, so now you can move on to feel. So go ahead and feel the texture of the cracker. Once again, maybe it confirms some of the things that you saw. So you saw that it was going to be pretty firm, crisp. Maybe you can feel the salt. All right, so now for the moment we've all been waiting for. We're going to take the smallest bite off like the corner of the cracker. Like I'm talking like barely enough to get your teeth on it. Just a little bit. Be conscious about that taste. So now what was confirmed about how you felt it was going to taste or the smells you picked up, and write down what your first observations are. The first initial small taste. Did it live up to the expectations? All right, so now at this point, you guys can have a full bite. Take a full bite of the cracker. Let it coat the mouth, right? Enjoy it, get all the different flavors. Let the salt punch the tongue. So what did we think about it? It's a saltine cracker. I know, this is the boringest food on the planet, right? Like, it is the plainest plain of plain. And I get that, and that's exactly why we do this for this activity, because otherwise, if you did like potato chips, like, oh yeah, I can see the oil, it's gonna be a little bit greasy, it's gonna be cool, whatever. But with just a sodium cracker, right, what sort of flavors did you pull out of it that you enjoyed? Like, what did you guys enjoy about that experience? Salt, yeah. The salt just punches the taste buds like, wake up, pow, right? What else? Crunchy, yeah. The texture was nice. What else? Very dry, yeah. So who has ever had these same thoughts, the same sense of consciousness when they've eaten saltines previously? Absolutely not. No, if anyone said that, I was like, you're lying, right? Or you've done this activity before somewhere. So this being said, with this kind of time to practice, this mindful eating approach, it's something that also you can kind of take to outside of here and outside of your life. It's think about times when you want to be more present in the situation. So even while you're working out, right? Like it gets pretty easy to go on autopilot mode while you're working out. But then think if you remain conscious saying, how am I feeling right this instant? How am I feeling right now 10 seconds later? How am I feeling now? Can I push a little bit harder? Can I grab and go up a little bit heavier weight? Can I get that squeeze out of that last rep just a little bit more? So there's a lot of kind of different avenues to take this more to life and kind of remain conscious about what you're doing. Otherwise, you're not getting the true benefits, right? And so then reeling it back into food is a lot of times we get in that autopilot mindset. We get in the autopilot mode where it's we take that full bowl of popcorn, we just shovel it in without actually asking ourselves, like, am I enjoying this? Can I taste the salts? Can I taste the butter? Oh, the sweetness, I love it, right? And so all of a sudden we can get so much more enjoyment out of so much less. One saltine cracker, right? So start trying to take this approach to that snacking and actually get that, because then you'll actually become mentally satisfied much quicker prior to eating a full bowl of snacks. You'll have that proper portion, that proper serving, I should say, right? So you can still get a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment out of food when you kind of take this mindfulness approach. The other thing we're going to practice or talk through is the honor your hunger. So if you look up at the slide, so basically there's the scale from 0 all the way to 10. Okay, so without going through every single category, 0 is like you are completely empty. You've literally haven't eaten for like a day, right? You are starving beyond starving. Okay. 10 being you are so full you are sick to your stomach, right? I'm talking about like Thanksgiving stuffed, uncomfortable nap time. Okay. Really what we need to be doing is we need to stay conscious of how we're feeling throughout the mealtime experience. And we really want to try and stay throughout the day between the 4 to 7. So at 4, it's kind of like the hunger awakens, right? This is going to typically be the best indicator, at least for myself, is kind of the afternoon approach where it's like, all right, it's already been about 2 hours since breakfast, but I'm still about an hour or 2 hours away from lunch. It's kind of that snack time mode where it's like, okay, my stomach might start making a couple little noises here and there. It's telling me, hey, it's time to eat again. Okay. At that point in time, that's right when I should start thinking about having a snack, having some sort of food. And everyone's going to be a little bit different with your daily routines. And when your body tells you, hey, it's time to have a little snack, right? Then at the max end, when we're kind of in the middle of eating our meal, we kind of want to stop at that 7 when we are completely satisfied. And that includes mental and physically, right? So we do need to feel that mental satisfaction as well. Otherwise, that's when you finish your meal and you go, oh, I can't wait for dessert, right? It's like, save some room for dessert and still enjoy that experience, but doesn't always need to take it on when you're already at that 7 completely satisfied level, okay? We need to find that range and kind of stick within it, because what happens when we go outside of it? Typically things that then we end up kind of trying to beat ourselves up for, which also isn't good, right? Because this is also partly kind of a mental game. And so as far as for honoring our hunger, we need to keep our body fed in within that range, because if we do get excessively hungry, then that's going to lead to kind of unconsciously eating, right? So if we let ourselves kind of operate within that 1 to 3 scale when we're really still needing food, that's when we're like, I just need to grab something, right? We've all said that before, saying, oh, you know, I was running late. I didn't eat anything yet today, so I had to swing by Chick-fil-A and grab a sandwich. That's okay every now and again, but if that continues to be kind of like the everyday or every other day sort of routine, then that's all of a sudden a habit that then we need to try and correct and find an avenue for, right? Also understanding kind of the head hunger versus stomach hunger. So we need to eat when we're hungry. So when we're at about that 3 to 4 scale, we need to feed ourselves, start getting ourselves higher up on that scale to then be able to manage that experience. And then we just need to stop and tell ourselves or feel when we are truly satisfied at that 7. Some things that sometimes that means is when you're in the middle of the meal and you're like, I feel like I've eaten enough, but I don't know if I'm really satisfied. What do? Do you just keep eating? Does anyone know how long it typically takes for the stomach and the hormones to actually tell you and kind of give your body the signals of being satisfied or being full? 2 hours? Is that your guess? Anyone else? 20 minutes. So yeah, just typically about 20 minutes. Close. Almost there. So with 20 minutes, if you think about it, how long is a typical meal time? I know for me, yeah, typically, yeah, maybe 15 on the long end. Yeah. So that being said, if your meal time is shorter than that 20 minutes, then you're recognizing you're not even giving your body enough time to actually send you that communication to let you know you're full. So then what ends up happening is you end up cleaning your plate, right? Because your body hasn't sent you any signals that you're full. And then it's all you lead to being way too high up on that hunger scale to where you're like, oh, I'm stuffed, I'm uncomfortable, maybe I'm bloated, right? Now I'm just uncomfortable. What then does that lead to? Do you typically enjoy your experience if you eat too much and you're uncomfortable and bloated? Can you still enjoy socializing with other people, or does it all of a sudden feel like a chore? So now all of a sudden the social experience that you went to try and enjoy is all of a sudden ruined because we didn't take the time we needed during the meal, during the nourishment portion to then lead to that. So that being said, pausing during your meals. When you recognize taking a break and having some water, that's when all of a sudden you add in the conversation with mealtime, right? That all kind of slows down that process that sometimes in the typical American life right now, we don't have time, right? We're on a schedule. We got to go. We got to go to hockey practice. We got to run over here. Oh, we got to go meet up friends in 10 minutes here. So all of a sudden trying to slow it down every once in a while and creating that experience and giving your body the actual time it needs to tell yourself that you're full is important, all right? So tonight, homework, measure how long your meal takes to eat tonight and try and push it to take that full 20 minutes. Okay? Yeah, Tony?
Do we have to apply this tomorrow?
Super Bowl.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll all have a call tomorrow. We'll all hop on. We'll conference in. We'll FaceTime. And then as we're snacking, we'll go ahead and put hard breaks in. That's a perfect example, though. It's like, are you going to go and not have the Super Bowl snacks you look forward to every year? Absolutely not. But then it's controlling the portions and taking them away from the bowl, putting them on your plate, going over, finding your seat, and then enjoying throughout the time, enjoying throughout the experience, right? Try and position yourself not right next to the chip bowl, like 2 feet away, like out of arm's reach, okay? All right, team, so that's kind of the mindful eating approach. So there can be a whole hour presentation just on that, but I just want to give you a little bit of snippet because once again, it does kind of break down nutrition. Say if you fill up half your plate with fruits and vegetables, long story short, and you stay conscious of what your body is telling you through your meals, that's going to be half the battle. Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit more specific for the people that do want some of the more science-based, exactly how many calories should I be putting in my body? How much protein do I need? So we're going to be talking about specifically right now just some differences in nutrition based on exercise. So anaerobic versus aerobic activity. So aerobic activity, the body can use oxygen in the metabolism process. So we can create energy and harvest energy in the body using oxygen. When we cross over into anaerobic, we cannot, okay? Aerobic energy sources, we can use glucose, so sugar or carbohydrates at its simplest form. Fatty acids, fats, and amino acids, basically the building blocks of proteins. We can use all of those for energy when our bodies can use oxygen in the energy metabolism process. For anaerobic energy, our bodies can only use glucose, okay? This little chart at the bottom is where as OTF members, it kind of clicks. You're like, oh, that's why, right? So when we are in the 80 to 100% of our max heart rates or our estimated max heart rate, our bodies are primarily using carbohydrates for energy, okay? Once we're at the 90% and above, we're only using carbohydrates for energy. So for the morning workout people, if you're coming in here and working out first thing in the morning and you start getting lightheaded, seeing spots, don't feel like you can really get to that top speed, top effort, it's probably because your body doesn't have carbohydrates to use for energy. It's kind of like, oh, that makes sense, right? So that being said, ways the body can store a certain amount of carbohydrates in the body as glycogen, okay? So glycogen can be stored in the liver as well as in the muscles, okay? Glycogen is just the stored version of carbohydrates. The thing that's interesting is the human body can only store enough glycogen in the body to last for about 20 to 22 miles of activity. Hence why when we talk about marathon runners, they have to carbo load, right? So increase the body's ability to hold on to carbohydrates, as well as then we can add it in dietary sources that also adds in a little bit more nutrition for us to use throughout that activity or that event. Pre-competition fueling, so you can think about this as like kind of pre-workout thinking about what to eat, what to ingest. I just like this graphic for kind of talking about if you are eating or consuming that meal over 4 hours prior to that event, that activity, then it can kind of be a combination of carbohydrate, fat, and protein and kind of be a solid, well-rounded meal. As we get closer to the time of competition or to the time of the workout, that's when we have to get simpler. So if you're planning on eating a snack and that's all you're going to be able to do prior to that workout, it might just be a banana 15, 30 minutes before, right? Versus if you are eating 2 or 3 hours before your activity, that's when you can kind of have a healthy combination of all of the nutrients, okay? So as you get closer to that go time, we want more carbohydrate based. As we get further and further out, that's when we can add in a little bit more protein and fat. Protein and fat, though, do stick around in the stomach a little bit longer and do take a little bit longer to digest. Therefore, sometimes, once we get to that hour mark, that's where I would say still stay pretty limited on the amount of fat that you're taking in. So sometimes those like mixed nut blends and things like that might have to be a little bit further before that exercise start. So this is where we get really specific. So energy needs of athletes with a focus on weight loss, but still being active roughly 3 to 4 times a week. 30 to 50% of your total calories should come from carbohydrates. And then as far as protein goes, it's all going to be based on the type of activity you do and that you consider doing and what you want to excel doing, okay? So if someone is For example, if I was working with like a high school wrestler that is on a severe calorie deficit because they are cutting 5 to 6 pounds every other week in order to make weigh-ins, but they still have to really focus on maintaining the amount of muscle mass, that's when I would have them in that higher range, that 1.4 to 2.0 grams per kilogram. A simple way to get your pounds in kilograms is just to divide your weight in pounds by 2.2. That will give your weight in kilograms. And then you could go ahead and do that equation to figure out exactly what that equates to you. For endurance athletes, a little bit less, so 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram for endurance athletes. And then for the everyday individual, they'll recommend 0.6 to 0.8. I would say everyone in this room, if you're working out at OTF 3 times a week, you should be higher than that 0.8 grams per kilogram because you're not just an everyday individual. I know you surround yourselves with probably like-minded individuals that do work out, so you're like, oh, it's normal to work out 3 or 4 times a week at this kind of intensity. It's not. Okay. Yeah.
Patrick, is it true that 3,500 calories equals a pound?
Correct. Yep. So 3,500 calories is a pound. So that way, when you are looking at like, okay, I want to lose roughly a pound a week, that's when that 500 calorie deficit per day kind of equates to that overall loss. Typically, what I would say is your first step, if you are already tracking your entire diet, you can totally really break this down and set your macro ranges more appropriately for yourself. But I would say if you're not and you don't plan to, because tracking can be very strenuous and typically is where people try it for a week and they go, this isn't for me, I'm done, right? And they get frustrated. If you simply just start by making sure that you're really hitting your protein goal from there, and then taking in the approach from mindful eating to kind of fill in the rest and eat when you're satisfied and still have a well-rounded nutrition, if you really just focus on your protein goal specifically, that's going to be a really good start. Really good start. This is another slide that kind of talks about those macro ranges. So if you do want to get more specific in your ranges specifically, this is another way to look at it as far as between whether you're focused on weight loss, maintenance, or muscle gain, how it varies per each one with those additional ranges. As you can see, when we are focused on muscle gain, that's when the carbohydrates are recommended a strict 45%, because if your body doesn't have energy to just go through daily life, it's not going to focus on building muscle until it has that energy. And so anytime that you are focused on that muscle growth, having that right amount of carbohydrates and then focus around that activity is vital. Otherwise, it will continue to pull the protein sources and pull the fat sources for energy because it doesn't have the carbohydrates as the base building block. All right, so planning ahead. 2 things that you can kind of think about when we start going into this category is you want to focus on the times, going back to the mindfulness, on when you are having to make those last minute decisions and saying like, oh, I was caught running from here to there, I haven't eaten for a while. Or you can also, honoring your hunger scale from that scale from 0 to 10, think about right now when you typically find yourself either on that really low side or on that really high side, and then start diving into those parts in the day and then plan ahead for those times of the day. So if it's every single afternoon, that's when you're like, oh, that's when I start snacking. Or for a lot of us, my guiltiness, right, is the after dinner, right? The time from like 7:30 to like 10 o'clock when I'm watching Netflix, hanging out, maybe doing a couple little chores around there. That's when I just start mindlessly snacking, right? So I need to come up with a plan to help remain mentally satisfied as well as physically satisfied during that time of the night, right? And so for me, that could be, oh yeah, that's when I added my additional protein shake in order to hit my protein requirements, right? So I have dinner, I wait about an hour, and then I have my protein shake right around the 8:15 time. Right? And then that fills that craving for something sweet and also allows that satiety for me to feel full and feel complete and not necessarily lead into the mindless snacking, right? So planning ahead for some pre-workout snack ideas for morning classes, half banana and some yogurt, oatmeal, handful of berries, hard-boiled egg, fruit smoothie with some whey protein, strawberries, banana, and spinach. You can also throw in branched chain amino acid supplements if you are working out fasted, because then it will give your body that dietary pool of amino acids so it doesn't have to break down your own muscles to use for energy. That can be one of the benefits of an amino acid drink, as well as they're pretty easy to digest. They typically don't upset the stomach. So if you are looking at supplementing because you aren't able to get a full complete meal, an hour before class, that might be a good option for you. Some other pre-workout snack ideas for afternoon classes would be apple and peanut butter. I do like kind of the nut butters because it does provide a little bit higher energy as far as with that. But then once again, it is typically related to also kind of how close you are getting to the afternoon class. So I wouldn't say any sort of fat source within an hour before that workout, probably just cut it out. But if it is more that hour and a half, 2 hour range, go ahead and use it. And once again, it's all about how you feel, right? So I could tell you the perfect nutrition to take in before working out to fuel you for that workout. But if you end up going with an upset stomach, are you going to be able to perform? No. So it is a kind of on a case-by-case individual basis with that. So you do kind of have to test it out and say, okay, I want to start adding a little bit of nutrition before my workouts, but then listen to your body and remain conscious of how it's making you feel. Okay. Some energy bites, so something made of like oatmeal, peanut butter, chia seeds, kind of like a blend of that. Granola bars, protein bars. Think balance of carbs to protein, avoid added sugars, high fructose corn syrup. So like I personally love RX bars. I know they work really well for my body as far as their the carbohydrate sources from dates, has some almonds in it, has some egg whites in it. So it's pretty simple, easy to digest. I've never run into any digestive issues with it. And so typically if I do need to squeeze in something before my morning workout, about the 45-minute mark, that works really well for me. So you can definitely try that out or try out some other granola bars. But ideal post-workout snack is making sure you get kind of refuel that body so it can build back stronger for that next day. And typically you do want a balance of some carbohydrates and some protein, okay? Because once again, if you just ingest kind of that whey protein shake after you work out, it's just gonna use that protein for energy to replenish the energy stores. So you kind of need to give your body some carbohydrates and that protein in order for the protein to actually build back the muscles a little stronger. So for this example, it was just throwing in a chocolate chip Cliff Bar, which we all have seen at the the local store, along with a 20-gram whey protein shake, and then that's going to give yourself 50 grams of carbohydrates or the 25 grams of protein. Allow your body to refill the carbohydrate stores it just used for energy for that workout and to break down some of the muscles, and then that protein help rebuild them back.
How soon should you get that after a workout?
Great question. So we've all heard of like the exercise window, like, oh, you need to eat like an hour after activity. It typically, it has opened up to be closer to about the 2 hour-ish range. I would say though, typically, if your goal is more on the weight loss side of things, you can probably push it back a little bit because typically you're not super hungry right after you're done working out. There's typically about a 30-minute to an hour window after you're done. But I would say don't push it off too long because we do want to give our bodies some nutrition to build back. Otherwise, you're going to notice a little bit more on the fatigue side and your body not recovering properly for that next workout the next day or even daily active living later that day. Other post-workout snack ideas, so fast and easy ideas. So protein powders, obviously, like I would love to say, like try and get as much through whole food as possible. But I do recognize that in the day-to-day life, sometimes you do need to supplement in order to at least have something over nothing, okay? So if you said, hey, should I have a chicken breast, rice and broccoli, or should I have a protein shake with a granola bar? I'd say have the chicken breast, have the full meal, right? But how often after your 6:15 class in the morning can you go home at 7:30 to a chicken breast, broccoli, and steamed rice? Right? Probably not super common. So fruit smoothies with added protein, yogurt, powder, milk, turkey on a whole grain wrap, Greek yogurt on banana, protein bars, chocolate milk, great for kids, right? Because it has some of the carbohydrates automatically in that chocolate milk as well as still a good protein source. So that can kind of be an all-in-one sort of thing. With the smoothies, something that me and my wife have done on Sundays, we kind of do like some of our prep cooking stuff. And so we make like a whole batch of smoothies, throw them in the freezer, and we just do it in mason jars. And you can buy little plastic lids this cover up. So you can make a whole batch of smoothies for the entire week, freeze them. The night before you're gonna have them, throw them in the fridge so then they thaw. So then you have a smoothie on the go, and that way you don't have to dirty up a blender every single morning and deal with the full mess of all the different ingredients you want to throw in. So that's an easy way of kind of preparing yourself properly. So then after your workout, you're not like, oh man, I don't have anything for breakfast again. Oh, got to stop by Chick-fil-A again, right? And no, Chick-fil-A did not pay me to mention them now twice. So overall, before we move on from this, I know we focus a little bit more on like kind of the pre and post workout snack and meal ideas, but generally speaking, from that mindful eating, from that mind plate, the general recommendations, try and identify in your day when you don't have that structure and add structure to it. Okay, so it's going to be different for everyone. Some people, it's more of the breakfast. They never know what to do, right? Find some options for it. Afternoon snack ideas, find some options. And then lastly, late at night meal ideas. There are ways to help prepare yourself on the weekends. So then when you get home at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, you're like, the last thing I want to do right now is cook a full meal. There are ways to set yourself up for success earlier. So then it's just second nature. I'm going to come home. I already have all the vegetables cut up. All I need to do is open up the Ziploc bag and dump them all in a pot. Cool, done, right? So there are ways to take steps to make it a little bit easier on that prep and make it less overwhelming by the time you get to it on that Thursday night. Last but not least, talking about hydration. Adequate hydration is absolutely key. Just throwing out the requirements as far as for men, right, about 3.7 liters. Women are 2.7 liters. Every single time that you work out for about a half hour, that's when you want to add in about another 8 ounces of water. So I'm glad, a lot of people have started carrying around water bottles with them to help improve their hydration. But then also, this is another thing, same thing with like the protein intake we talked about earlier. One easy way is track your typical water intake just on one day, maybe 2 days, so you can understand kind of the routine and the rhythm, just to understand, am I getting enough water in a given day? And if you aren't, then find smart ways saying, hey, every single time I go up to the bathroom, that's when I have to refill my water bottle, right? Or every single time, sometimes you can even set a timer on your watch, set a timer on your phone to remind you, hey, drink some water. They even make water bottles now that light up and vibrate every like 30 minutes to tell you, hey, drink some water. Hey, I'm saying if it works for you, it works for you. Some other tips for tracking how much water you drink is you can put a couple rubber bands at the bottom of your water bottle. So if you're planning on drinking 8 water bottles full, have 8 rubber bands and move them to the top as you drink one. So then you can track how many times you drank, or a little string with beads on it too. That's another helpful way to just slide up a bead every single time you consume 1 water bottle. So try and track just for 1 or 2 days so you can make sure and double check yourself, because otherwise it's really easy to look at your overall routine and go, I'm generally pretty good. I think I drink enough water. I think I eat enough protein. I think I do these things. It's easy to have this kind of false confidence in our general routine. So I'm asking you to stay conscious, go back, evaluate where you're at, and then assess from there on what we need to kind of add in or take away from your current routine. Any questions on hydration?
Is it true you can hydrate with beer?
So alcohol is also a diuretic. Any other questions on hydration?
Can you overhydrate?
Of course you can, yep. And so generally speaking, if you do have a well-rounded diet and have enough vitamins and minerals, that's going to help balance out the amount of water that your body can actually retain. Typically, when you overhydrate with just water specifically, at some point it's just going to be water, and then your body doesn't have the minerals to actually hold onto the water where it's supposed to, and then you're going to excrete it. In order to become ill from overhydration is pretty hard, because the body does a pretty good job. You would actually have to like push it by, hey, I'm going to chug 2 gallons of water right now in this instant in order to overdo it. So, any other questions?
What about for endurance, like hiking in the mountains or something like that? How far ahead do you have to hydrate for that?
At least a full day. Yeah, so I mean, I would typically think about 3 days ahead of time, already start with some sort of like, not just Pedialyte, but some sort of more sodium-rich drink as well, and then to make sure to have that with you on the hike as well. Because even going into it, when you have kind of the clear urine where you know like, hey, I'm overhydrated right now, then trying to maintain that throughout is going to be the challenge. So then it's making sure that every other kind of bottle of water, you do have some sort of sugar as well as some source of like sodium, potassium in that as well.
Say that applies to like marathon training too?
100%, yeah. Yep. And so really with marathon training, it depends on what you're adding in for your actual nutrition, right? So if your nutrition is a higher sodium food, then typically sometimes that will actually have the sodium, potassium, and some of the minerals you need to then help hold on to some of that water, versus having to then supplement with like the Pedialyte or the Gatorades or the other sports drinks as well. So just making sure you kind of get the full picture and go, okay, if I am training for this, where am I getting my sugar? Where am I getting my minerals from? And then where's the water coming in?
So where does like alcohol and wine, you brought that up, really fall into this? Is it like know you shouldn't be doing it, or just occasional?
Oh. So I specifically avoid alcohol typically because I want to spare everyone the bad news. So the couple things I will mention is like I'm not here to say don't drink because I also think that we're all here to live and enjoy life, right? So it's that fine line of moderation is key at the end of the day. If you do find yourself building bad habits on linking like, oh, every single time it's ready for bedtime, I can't go to bed until I have my 2 glasses of wine. So it builds an almost like habitual routine, right? That's when I would say, hey, let's try and find something else to focus on. But if it is the occasional glass of wine here and there, I will say of trying to make sure that you still enjoy it and stay mindful of it, that you are still enjoying the experience and it's not just becoming habitual is the key. The couple things that I know I've noticed for myself and take from my experience is recognizing how it impacts you indirectly as well. So for example, having even that 1 beer, 1 glass of wine at night as a wind down, we can all agree 1 glass of wine isn't going to do much for you. But there are studies that show even 1 glass of wine within 2 hours of bedtime will decrease your REM sleep by about 25%. So that being said, like I had to cut out just that 1 beer, that 1 glass of wine at night because then all of a sudden I started paying attention, staying conscious of it and saying, yeah, I wake up in the morning. It's not like I'm hungover or anything, right? I'm not dehydrated from the 1 glass of wine, but I feel way more tired than I would have if I didn't. Right? So that's what I have kind of linked to just even minimal kind of alcohol use as far as during the week is just saying it does impact my sleep. Therefore, on kind of the weeknights, that's when I cut it out because I also know that I'm getting up at maybe 5 in the morning, right? Where the 6 hours of sleep I'm getting, I need that to be quality sleep. You know, I don't have a lot of wiggle room to spare versus maybe on the weekends when I can get a full 8 hours of sleep. I have a little bit more wiggle room where if the first 2 hours are kind of more interrupted sleep because of my, 2 or 3 glasses of wine, it's not as big a deal in the overall pool or grand scheme of things. But, yeah.
So, just like the alcohol, is there a time that you shouldn't drink water before bed, like an hour before, same with food?
No, water, you can drink up until bedtime. I will say if you notice that it impacts your sleep, for example, hey, every single night I go to sleep and I chug a 32-ounce water bottle full and then I get up 3 hours later to go to the bathroom every single night, that then is going to inhibit your sleep, right? But typically, actually, if you do find yourself having to get up in the middle of the night and go to sleep, there's actually a lot of, depending on when you eat and snack before bedtime, a lot of that is actually more due to an insulin change and a blood sugar change is what's actually causing you to get up and have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night sometimes. So, any other questions? Yeah.
What would be, so I can't eat any gluten, so like you say whole grains, like what would you recommend in terms of good whole grains so you can't eat most grains?
Great question. I would probably want to more look, it depends, because I would want to look at what other carbohydrates you're consuming, then seeing where your fiber is coming from in other aspects. So that's what I would want to dive down to first before just answering that question with a more blanket response. So I would say it depends on what other foods you're consuming from that same kind of carbohydrate family. But I would say the main focus I would have for you is focusing on how much fiber you're getting and where that fiber is coming from. That's what I would start with.
So what are some good fiber sources that are gluten-free?
Fruit. Yeah. So the berries. Fruit and vegetables really at the end of the day, and things that have more skins, more seeds. And then so any sort of like kind of from the nut seed family as well. So like the chia seeds, adding those in as a supplement too, being able to sprinkle those on the top of yogurt, adding in that sort of stuff would be a good approach.
How does your plate change as you get older, specifically women?
Oh. Great question. It could, what I would say is, it still depends a big time on your activity level, where you're at with your menstrual cycle, right, and menopause. Can all have different impacts on hormones and stuff. What I would say is typically what I've seen is the carbohydrate is the biggest thing to change, but then once again, that's really based on activity. So carbohydrate might get less, and that's when I try to focus more of the carbohydrates being consumed around the times that you're active during the day is where I see that kind of shift, where maybe the plate is going to be a little bit small in overall calories, but then smaller meals or more consistent snacking throughout the day. and then more of the energy or the carbohydrate-rich foods being ingested around the time of activity. So when you're out running errands, when you're doing yard work, when you're doing that sort of stuff, around your exercise before and after. And then more later on the evening, starting at 5 o'clock, starting to really focus more on kind of the fats and protein and really have more of the minimal carb sources coming from than the vegetables. They're going to be that lower calorie option, but yet still have the vitamins and minerals and the fiber needed. So, yeah.
If you want to eat something, not maybe right before you go to bed, but shortly before you go to bed, you want to sleep well. You don't want to just turn to fat as you sleep. Like, what types of foods are the best to eat, like, later at night?
Great question. So the question was for the online people too. Sorry, I was really bad for the last couple of questions of rephrasing the questions. But the question was like, if you are going to eat something prior to bedtime, what are the better options for that? And I would say avoid the more processed or just the more carbohydrate dense and calorie high foods. So sticking more to the proteins, fats are also okay. But then you're not going to necessarily have that insulin response with the insulin spike, which then typically leads to then having to actually use the restroom later on in the night too. So trying to focus more on the protein sources. I would say ideally sometimes people ask for windows, right? And it's like right around the hour and a half before bedtime, 2 hours before bedtime is when you should try and not consume any more nutrition. But I will say on the flip side, let's say your goal is more muscle growth and muscle building, strength building. That's when actually a lot of times an hour before bedtime, we would actually recommend like a casein protein, which is a milk-based protein that takes longer for the body to digest. So think about while you're sleeping, your body was actually still actively feeding you protein throughout the night. That would last for about 6 to 8 hours. All of a sudden, then that's going to lead to growth and more focus on anabolic. But if your goal is more the weight loss, then that's when it would more be the cut it off about 2 hours, hour and a half before bedtime, and have it more be of a protein source.
What do you think about waking up, just drinking coffee for an hour, hour and a half before you eat your food if you're not hungry and you're not separate from a workout?
Great question. There was actually just a recent, on one of the podcasts I listened to, they recently had a discussion on caffeine in the morning. Was the question was, when you first wake up in the morning, if it's the routine to just kind of drink coffee for the first hour, hour and a half of that morning routine prior to having food. There's not really a problem with having caffeine on an empty stomach necessarily, other than if it upsets your stomach, right? But there is a study that basically the body naturally releases basically energy producing hormones, we'll say, at around that 45-minute to hour and a half mark. So typically if you first wake up and you kind of have that caffeine source right away, you're cutting the body off from being able to do that naturally. And so what they're saying is you should really try and wait to have any caffeine in the morning till about the hour and a half to 2 hour mark. And then you won't get that slump you get after the caffeine has worn off, more around that later morning time frame. So if you recognize this in yourself and you go, okay, I wake up, throw the pot of coffee on, have a couple cups, go through my morning routine, and all of a sudden by like 10 o'clock is when I start hitting a slump, when I have my second pot of coffee or my second cup of coffee, whatever that is. If you can say, yep, that's relatable, that's me, I would say try and push off a couple times and remain conscious of how you're feeling, but put off having that first initial cup of coffee till about an hour to hour and a half of wake time even, and you might notice a difference and you're not crashing around that 10 o'clock time frame.
What would you have then? Anything? Or just nothing?
Nothing. Water.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tony.
What is the benefits of all this intermittent fasting that you see everywhere and everyone's doing it and having success, and it's the best thing ever?
So the question was on intermittent fasting. What are some of the benefits for it? What I will say is depending on the person, there are times when I would recommend someone to intermittent fast, and typically it's the people when they don't have an answer for like the post-dinner snacking. So if you look at your diet and you go, I recognize I'm really on for breakfast, lunch, and dinner Monday through Friday, it's the post 6:30, 7 o'clock time frame that gets out of whack. Then I say, cool, we're just going to shut it down. We're just going to put a window on and say, hey, you're going to have an 8-hour, 10-hour fast from 7 o'clock every night until X time the next day, right? And so that's how I would typically use intermittent fasting. There are some studies that recognize that it would have a help on your hormones and kind of leveling those out, as well as just overall being able to more focus consciously on the foods that you are taking in during that time frame. I've heard of stories about people who intermittent fast and they simply have one meal a day, and they ingest whatever they want in that 1 hour of that day and still get some results from that. But then once again, the amount of stress that puts on the body for overall wellness, it's not right. The bodies are meant to kind of eat throughout. And so I would say depending on your goal, there are benefits, but I would say generally speaking for overall wellness that we're all trying to kind of lead into, I would say intermittent fasting, if you want to focus on having, that 8-hour window of food, you can do that. If you kind of lessen it down in there, I don't see a big impact of it. Any other questions? Otherwise, if we have more specific, we can handle those offline too. All right, well, thank you everyone so much for your time today. Thank you for your participation. I really appreciate it. And if you do have any future topics you would like to be covered, I did put a little section on the sign-in sheet on the side that said any nutrition topics of interest. I love to just get your feedback in there. So if you do have something that you really want to know more about, write it down there. So then if we are able to come back and do another nutrition presentation, I can cater a presentation with some of that information specifically. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you again for your time. And have a great weekend. We're here. Yeah, thanks.